Okay, guys, I'm going to read chapter 11 while the boys make a fort in their bedroom. So, it's the secret school, and Ida is secretly being the teacher, but the county lady now knows. And so, let's see what happens. Chapter 11. That Friday, because Herbert had been out of school for 3 consecutive days, Ida decided to visit him. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing, not even Flex. When she drove away from the school that afternoon, she simply turned the car to the right instead of the left. The Bexler's farm was 2 miles south down the valley. "Brake and clutch," she called to Flex after a short ride. She stopped the car, but kept the motor running. Cranking it up on her own was very hard. "Why are we stopping?" Flex asked. Ida untied the door. "We're at the Bexler's farm," she announced. "What are we doing here?" Flex wanted to know, as he squirmed out from under the dashboard. "I want to see if Herbert is all right," Ida said as she stepped down. "Is something the matter with him?" "I don't know. I thought I'd better find out why he's not been in school. You wait here." The road where she had parked ran along the slight bluff. The Bexler's farm was below her, cradled by a curve in the road. While Ida didn't exactly know how big the place was, she knew a poor farm when she saw it. There was one small house, its wooden sides grayed with weather and the remains of the red paint. Not far from the depleted porch was a rusty truck. It had no wheels and seemed to be permanently on the ground. There were 2 other pieces of farm equipment, both rusty. The remains of the children's swing hung from a cottonwood tree, its 2 frayed rope strands dangling. Some 30 yards from the house was a barn. It was fairly large, but the main doors were lopsided and, from all appearances, permanently open. Over the doorway hung a bleached skull of an elk. Its white antlers extended as long fingers of ice. In the small corral in front of the barn stood a horse. A lanky young colt hovered close by, the only new thing in sight. Herbert was not to be seen, nor, for that matter, was any other human. There was a sense of disorder about the farm. Surely not the way Ida's father ran things. Ida wondered if it was a good idea for her to even be here. As she hesitated, a man strolled out of the barn. Ida recognized him immediately as Herbert's father, Mr. Bexler. He wore rubber boots, rather dirty clothing, and a straw Western-style hat on his head. His face, what she could see of it, was hidden by a shaggy gray mustache. "Howdy," he called, looking up to where Ida stood. He touched his hand to the brim of his hat in a gesture of polite greeting, even as he poked the pitchfork into the earth, then leans on it. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm Ida Bison," Ida called down. "I'm Herbert's classmate." You are now?" "Yes, sir. And what brings you here?" His teacher wanted to know if he was all right." "Did she?" "I'm sure I told Mrs. Fletcher it was none of her business where my boy is, that she wasn't to come asking for him no more." "She didn't ask you to come here, did she?" Shocked by Mr. Bexler's words, Ida stammered, "Not really." "Then what are you doing here?" Ida didn't know what to say. "Aren't you a bit young to be a courting?" Courting. It means going after him as if she's interested in him being her husband. Ida blushed. "No, I'm actually his teacher," she blurted out, only to instantly regret her words. Momentarily, Mr. Bexler glanced towards the barn and looked back at Ida. "What happened to Mrs. Fletcher?" he asked her. "She left," Ida said, wishing she had never come. "Did she?" "Her mother got ill," Ida said. Now she saw Herbert standing deep in the interior of the barn, hidden by the shadows. He stood motionless. "Just how are you, anyway?" Mr. Bexler asked. 14. "I see," Mr. Bexler said with care. There was no anger in his voice, just a dry tone that was burdened with a sad and weary weight. "You know a Bison's daughter?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Are you playing teacher, are you? We're not playing, Mr. Bixler, Ida said, with growing frustration. We're trying to do things properly, and since I am his teacher, I was worrying about Herbert, and he hadn't been to school lately, and, well, we missed him. That right? Look here, Miss Ida. As I told that Miss Fletcher, Herbert is sorely needed around here. Schooling, I'm afraid, comes second to this farm. Especially now that I hear that he's just a playing school. Mr. Bixler, it's not a... Ida started to protest. Excuse me, my interruption. Miss, but did you get the school board's approval for what you're doing? Miss Ida, the truth is schooling just hasn't much to do with what's going on here. Mr. Bixler again touched his hat with his hand. So I'd much be obliged if this was your last visit. Otherwise, I just might have to visit Mr. Jordan and let him know what's going on. Without another word, he turned and headed for the barn. Ida was certain he saw Herbert drive away back into the barn's interior. For a moment, she stood there angry at Mr. Bixler, but anger still at herself, too. Had she given everything away? Worried, she ran back to the car and all but jumped into the seat. What's the matter? Flex asked. Nothing, Ida said. Let's go home. Chores are waiting. As she drove, she went over what had been said, getting more and more worried. 3 miles from their home, she called out, "Brake clutch!" Abruptly, she swung the car down a side road. Where are we going now? To see Tom. Why? I need to speak with him. They reached Tom's house in a moment. The Coles, like the Bisons, were sheep farmers, and fairly successful ones. Where everything was shabby about the Bixler's farm, the Coles farm was neat and spruce. Beneath the shadows of sand mountains, buildings, fences, and machinery were all in good order. Ida came to a jerky stop in front of the main house, where there was a long open porch. Mary was on the front steps playing with 3 dolls. Tom was hunkered over a table. "Hey there," he called. There were streaks of black all over his face, and his hands were dirty. Ida let Flex out of the car. They climbed out, and then climbed out herself. "I have to talk to you," she announced. "You Miss Bison or Ida?" "Oh, Tom, please don't." "Come on up," he said with a grin. Flex, not waiting for an invitation, had already joined Mary on the steps. Ida stepped onto the porch. On the table was some kind of small machine. There was lots of dirty sheets of paper out. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Got me a little old printing press," Tom said. "My dad found it in the junk shop in town. I made myself some ink out of old crankcase oil and solvent. Got most of the letters, just not enough O's. And it only does 1 page at a time." "What are you printing?" I'd asked. "Circulars about church supper. But what is it? You look all enraged." "Tom," Ida said, "I just went to Herbert's place. Wanted to find out where he wasn't at school. His father keeps him close." "I know. Mr. Bixler didn't know what we were doing at school, and by mistake I told him." "You did?" "Tom, he said he might talk to Mr. Jordan. You think he will?" "Don't know." "But if he does, what do you think will happen?" Tom considered the question, and then, with a shrug, he said, "I guess your guess is as good as mine." "You tell your folks?" "Some." "About me?" "Well, yes." "What did they say?" "Said they'd always figured you was smart." Ida felt pleased but embarrassed. "Well, I'm really worried. Just hope I didn't ruin everything." "Can't imagine you ruining anything." Suddenly feeling shy, Ida turned and stepped off the porch. "Come on, Flex," she said. "We've got work to do at home." Tom followed them to the car. Thanks for coming by," he said. "I'm sorry I can't stay," she said. "Pretty busy," Tom said. "I guess I am." Tom bent over the crank. Flex got in, and then Ida said, Tom stood up. Your farm, ours, Ida said, they're just so different from Herbert's. He was so
really big with the lead plate.
Sad. Finding it difficult to say what she felt, she gripped the steering wheel hard. Why do you think that has to be? Don't know. Luck, maybe? My old man says it's a different way of working. Maybe we'll learn all about it in high school. She shook her head. I wish I knew. Hey, Ida. What? Tom pushed the hair away from his forehead. Just want you to understand, we all know how hard you're working. It can't be easy. Thank you, she said. Flex, clutch. Tom gave the motor a crank a few times. Ida adjusted the spark and throttle and then called clutch and brake. We're going home now, Flex asked as the car began to move. Yes, Ida said, watching Tom's image grow smaller and smaller in the rearview mirror.